The coffee was still hot when everything changed. Orion had been sitting at that small outdoor table for 11 minutes, he knew, because he had checked his watch exactly 4 times, each glance a little more anxious than the last. The city hummed around him in its usual indifferent way, pigeons arguing over crumbs near the planter boxes. A distant bus exhaling its tired sigh around the corner. He had almost convinced himself to leave, to text his friend Cassie that the whole blind date idea had been a spectacular mistake, when she appeared at the terrace entrance and the rest of the world simply stopped making noise. Her name was Serena. He would learn that in approximately 45 seconds. But in that first moment, before names and small talk, and all the careful scaffolding people construct around their real selves, she was just a woman in a pale pink dress with dark wavy hair and eyes the color of deep harbor water, walking toward him with a calm confidence that made him feel, inexplicably, like the nervous one, which he absolutely was. Orion was a man who had survived a failed business, a broken engagement, and 3 years of quietly rebuilding himself from the inside out. He had faced boardrooms full of skeptical investors without flinching, but something about the way this woman looked at him as she settled into the chair across the table, set her small bag down without ceremony, and met his eyes directly. Something about that made his chest feel hollow,
where every story reminds us that kindness, courage, and love can appear in the most unexpected moments. If you enjoy stories that inspire the heart, press like, share this video with someone special, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to AFK Stories for more powerful stories.
Full at the same time, she studied him for a moment. Not rudely, not cruelly, but with the calm, unhurried attention of someone who had learned to read people the way others read weather. Then the softest smile pulled at the corner of her mouth, and she said it, quietly, almost to herself, like a conclusion she had not intended to say aloud. She looked straight into his eyes and told him he was trouble, not as a complaint, not as a warning to herself, simply as a fact she had recognized, the way you recognize a storm gathering on a horizon you have seen before. Orion laughed, a short, startled sound, and asked what on earth she meant by that. And Serena lifted her coffee cup, took a slow sip, and told him that trouble was not always a bad thing. That some kinds of trouble were the only things that had ever made her feel genuinely alive. What neither of them said that afternoon, what lived silently beneath the coffee and the careful conversation, and the way they kept almost reaching across the small table before pulling back, was how thoroughly broken they each were. Orion's story was the kind that looked like success from the outside and felt like wreckage from the inside. He had built a small architecture firm in his late 20s with his then-fiancée, Priya, only to watch both the firm and the relationship collapse in the same brutal season when a major contract fell through, and the trust between them went with it. He had spent the years since designing other people's spaces while leaving his own life deliberately sparse, like a room stripped down to bare walls, because bare walls could not disappoint you. Serena's damage was quieter and older. She had grown up watching her mother love too hard and lose too completely, again and again. And she had made herself a private promise somewhere around the age of 17 that she would never be that woman. She had kept that promise with remarkable discipline. She had a career she was proud of. She ran a small nonprofit that brought arts programming to underfunded schools. She had good friends, a clean apartment, a full life by every visible measure. What she had refused to let herself have was the thing she actually wanted most, which was someone who made the world feel larger just by being in it. She had almost canceled the date 3 times that morning. They stayed at that terrace table for 2.5 hours. The coffee went cold and they ordered more. A light wind came up and scattered the petals from the little vase of pink flowers between them, and neither of them moved to clean them up. They talked about work and then, carefully, about the work beneath the work, the reasons they had each chosen the paths they had. Serena told him about a 12-year-old girl named Amara, who had walked into one of her after-school painting sessions 6 months ago, barely speaking, and had recently produced a canvas so raw and beautiful that Serena had cried in her car afterward. Orion told her about the apartment he had designed last year for a retired schoolteacher, An 81-year-old woman named Mrs. Okafor, who had wanted a reading corner with exactly the right quality of afternoon light, and how getting that light right had felt more meaningful than any of the big commercial projects on his resume. They were talking, without quite realizing it, about the same thing, about what it meant to build something that mattered, about what got lost when you let fear make your decisions. Orion noticed at first that quiet, vertiginous recognition that this conversation was not going the way first dates usually went, that they had somehow skipped past the surface and arrived somewhere much more honest without a map. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the old defensive instinct that had served him so well for 3 years. He almost steered things back toward safer ground. He almost made a joke, changed the subject, checked his phone. He didn't. What happened instead was that Serena looked down at the scattered flower petals on Donda table between them and said something that Orion would replay for weeks afterward. She said that she had spent a long time being very careful, that she had become expert at sensing exactly how close she could let someone get before she needed to create distance, that she was good at it, that it had protected her, and that she was so tired of being good at it. She did not look at him when she said it. She said it to the petals, quietly, like a confession to no one in particular. Orion was quiet for a moment. Then he told her that he understood that feeling better than she might expect, that he had done the same thing, just differently, not with coldness but with busyness, with projects and deadlines and a schedule so full there was no room for anything that could hurt him. He told her that his apartment, the one he had designed for himself after everything fell apart, had no personal photographs anywhere in it, that he had told himself it was an aesthetic choice, that he had believed that, for almost 2 years before he admitted, it was something else entirely. She looked up at him then, that harbor water gaze, clear and direct, and just slightly afraid. And the fear in her eyes did not make her look weak. It made her look like someone who was choosing courage anyway, which is the only kind of courage that actually means anything. They did not fall in love over cold coffee on a terrace in an afternoon. That is not how real things happen. And both of them were too honest with themselves to mistake the beginning of something for the whole of it. What they did do was agree to see each other again. And then again. And over the weeks that followed, slowly and imperfectly, and with a great deal of the 2 steps forward 1 step back, that marks any real progress between 2 people carrying real history, something genuine began to grow. There were difficult moments. There was an evening 2 months in when old fear surged up in Serena, and she pulled away so completely, so suddenly, that Orion stood outside her building in the November cold for 10 minutes trying to understand what had just happened. There was a morning when Orion's old patterns rose up, and he defaulted to distance, to silence, to the safe emptiness of his photographless apartment, and Serena sat with that pain instead of running from it. They learned each other's defenses the way you learn the particular creaks of an old house, not to exploit them, but to move carefully around them, to understand them, to eventually help each other, lay some of them down. 6 months after that afternoon on the terrace, Orion finally hung something on the wall of his apartment. It was a small photograph, slightly imperfect because he had taken it himself, a picture of Serena laughing at something out of frame, caught in the gold light of a late afternoon, looking like someone who had decided to stop being so careful and discovered that the world had not, in fact, ended. He put it in the reading corner of his apartment, in the afternoon light, because he had spent his whole career understanding that some things deserve to be seen in exactly the right light. On the back of the frame, in small letters, he had written the only thing that had made him feel genuinely seen in years. 6 words she had spoken to him on their very first meeting, across a table scattered with flower petals, before they had even known each other's names. Your trouble. And beneath that, in his own handwriting, his quiet answer to it. So are you. Thank God. If this story reached something inside you, if it reminded you that being seen is worth the risk, that the right kind of trouble is sometimes the only thing that brings you back to life, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Your small gesture keeps stories like this one alive. And before we close, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever met someone who looked at you and just knew? Tell me your story. Every heart has one worth telling. Some connections don't arrive quietly. Some of them look you in the eyes across a small table, name exactly what you are, and change everything. Orion and Serena would tell you it was terrifying. They would also tell you it was the best thing that ever happened to them. And they would tell you without hesitation, without qualification, that it was worth every single carefully guarded wall they had to tear down to get there.